Okay, here we go. And let's see if I can get your... There we go. Okay. So we're going to be looking at types of learning that seem to occur without any obvious reinforcement. Radical behaviorists like B.F. Skinner was of the belief that no reinforcement meant that no learning would take place. In their experiments with various animals, they could not document any learning unless they used reinforcement to get those results. Now, it turns out that much of their conclusion was limited by the type of experiments than they did rather than the abilities of humans and animals. One of the types of cognitive learning that's based on mental processes rather than that of reinforcement is called latent learning. And this occurs in the absence of obvious reinforcement. The learning is demonstrated, though, when an incentive is provided. This was identified by Tolman and Honzik in 1930. Their experiment that demonstrated this involved 3 groups of rats. Each of the rats was placed in a maze daily, and they tracked the rats' performance by noting the number of errors the rats made before finally finding their way to the exit of the maze. One group of rats received reinforcement each day from the very beginning. Each time they reached the exit of the maze, they found a food reward there. As you can see, their performance improved consistently. And of course, behaviorists such as Skinner would say, well, see, they're getting reinforcement, their performance is going to improve, they're learning. A second group of rats, however, was placed in the maze daily and for the first 10 days received no reinforcement. On day 10, they began to provide these rats with reinforcement as well. You can see their performance with this beige line here. Notice how their performance suddenly, drastically improved immediately after day 10 when the incentive, the reward, was actually provided. The sudden improvement in performance actually suggested that these rats had learned a great deal about how the maze was set up over those first few days, but were not fully demonstrating it until there was an incentive. Now, you might be looking at this and wondering about, well, there was some improvement on the first few days, even though this was before the rewards. Notice also there was a third group of rats that never got reinforcement who also improved a little bit in terms of their performance. Well, one of the ways we might explain that is that indeed maybe just being released from the maze, the freedom to move around, might have in and of itself been reinforcing. Or it could be that once they were out of the maze, they were placed back into their home cages where they were more comfortable. So there was maybe some hidden reinforcement actually responsible for some of this initial improvement. But do look at that drastic reinforcement, or that drastic improvement of the group that did not receive reinforcement on those first few days. Now, this might be analogous to something that maybe you've encountered. Maybe, let's say, you visit an unfamiliar town, and as you drive around, nobody's giving you reinforcement to learn where things are. Nobody's popping M&Ms in their mouth or anything. But after a time, you get hungry. And you have now an incentive to remember where things were that you encountered. And so you remember, oh yeah, there was a Whataburger a few blocks back. I know it's that way. And sure enough, you turn around and go there. You have learned something in the absence of reinforcement. Simply you did not demonstrate that till you had a need, till you got hungry. They also found that rats running these mazes develop cognitive maps, a mental map of the maze. And this is another type of learning that appears to occur without specific reinforcement. And what they found is if they blocked off the usual route that the rats took to exit the maze, the rats would always move in the direction of the exit. Again, pure behaviorism based on reinforcement would suggest they would go into trial and error type of mode, but indeed they knew the direction to go. And once again, that's very similar to something you've experienced when you first came on the campus. You know where things were. You didn't have one of these cognitive maps, but after being on campus a while, you know that, okay, well, here's the building where my class is, here's where the parking lot is, and you can mentally picture how to get to other locations, the library, bookstore, what have you, from wherever you're at. So you've developed that cognitive map as well. Now, one of the things that the behaviorists didn't take into account as well were the biological constraints of various species. Species learn adaptive associations most readily. On the other hand, things that do not specifically aid their survival may be much more difficult for that species to learn. As an example, pigeons can readily learn to flap their wings to escape a shock. However, they have much more difficulty learning to flap their wings in order to obtain food. Flapping their wings is a normal, natural response to get away from something unpleasant, whereas that's not how they actually get their food. Now, on the other hand, pigeons will very easily learn how to peck at a disc in order to get food, but again, have more difficulty learning how to flap their wings in order to get food as a reward. So each species is somewhat limited simply by its biology as to what associations it can learn. Another limitation of reinforcement training that was also identified by later researchers is something called instinctive drift. This was first identified by two psychologists both named Breland, husband and wife team, who also trained animals for circuses and for Hollywood shows, movies. And in one case, they had trained some pigs for circus owners. The pigs, given food rewards, learned how to pick up giant wooden coins and place them in a giant piggy bank. A nice, cute trick for the pigs to do at the circus. So they returned the pigs to the circus owner, and a couple months went by, and lo and behold, they got a call from the circus owner who said, the pigs are starting to do some weird stuff. They pick up the coins all right, and they start to carry them, but then they drop them on the ground and they start pushing them around with their snouts. We don't understand what's going on. Well, if you think about it, a pig's instinctive behavior when thinking about food is to begin rooting around in the ground. That's how they find their food. And they did associate carrying the coins with receiving a food reward that they were trained with. And so they were beginning to revert back to instinctive behavior. So this instinctive drift is something that we should be aware of. Yes, we may be able to train an animal to do something that is somewhat outside of its normal behavior repertoire, but it is quite likely that given some time, they will begin drifting back towards their natural behaviors. Another kind of cognitive learning occurring without any direct reinforcement to the person doing the learning would be observational or social learning. We can learn by imitating others. This is sometimes called modeling our behavior on what others do. As you can see in the picture, the monkey on the right is able to learn how to press the pictures, touch the pictures in a certain order in order to receive a food reward. This is a good example of social learning, observational learning, monkey see, monkey do. Obviously, this is something humans engage in. It's been observed with many primates, also with dogs. Observational learning has been identified as well. Mirror neurons are specific neurons that neuroscientists have discovered within the brain that become active during observational learning. And it's believed then that these mirror neurons are the basis for our ability to learn by watching others. In the chart there that you see, the illustration, you can see the activity in the person's brain. An individual who is experiencing pain. Notice that a person who is empathizing, who is tuning in on what that person is feeling, you see similar brain activity, not as much, but in similar areas. Observational learning, we know, begins early in life. This 14-month-old child watches a man on a television set pulling apart a toy, and when given the toy, readily does so themselves. Researchers believe that mirror neurons then are the basis for empathy, being able to understand how others feel, put ourselves in other people's place, as well as theory of mind. Theory of mind being having an awareness of how others, other people's points of view. On the other hand, it's suggested that autism in part is a matter of inactive mirror neurons. Research has indicated that those mirror neurons are less active in the brains of those with autism. Albert Bandura was one of the first to study the effects of social learning, observational learning. He conducted his famous Bobo doll study in 1961. I'm going to attempt to show you a video that documents that. This is actually from that research that he conducted. Well, let's see. Okay, I'm going to find it here. Maybe I'll have to bring it back up for you. It's just like in class. I have to look for it. Yeah. Let's see, where are we? Okay. And there we go. Okay. And hopefully you'll be able to hear it as well.
Segmented.
Yeah. Okay. Sound should be coming back in.
Perform.
There we go.
Aggressive acts toward a inflated doll, and the physical aggression was.
This is actually Albert Bandura.
Nodding off first. Down and be what that reaction in the juice as you can see directly in the chart. Exposure again isn't again, even though it's never made, and each other no exposure to the which is also the phenomenology of language, and then you can learn very prematurely, and children could choose to play aggressively. It was moving in the doll. The object was mentioned the doll. And the control group, who had no exposure to the dose of water and never exhibited the novel forms of aggression, and embellished the doll with a weapon.
Now, Bandura did further experiments in which the adult models were either rewarded or punished for behaving aggressively towards the doll. And interestingly enough, if the adult model was punished for aggressiveness towards the doll, children would avoid aggressive behavior towards that doll. They would not imitate that, but rather do the opposite. And then, of course, though, if the adult model was rewarded for that behavior, they became even more likely to behave aggressively. This is what then became labeled as vicarious reinforcement and punishment. Vicarious is where you put yourself in someone else's place. And as we watch others, we may put ourselves in their place and recognize that if we do the same things they do, we're likely to get the same consequences. Bandura also found that antisocial models, in other words, those who harmed others, whether they were in the family, the neighborhood, or on TV, may have antisocial effects, in other words, lead to behavior which harms others as well. Gentile and others also showed through experimental studies that elementary school children exposed to violent media and games showed more aggressive behavior. So it was not just a correlation that violent kids like violent entertainment, but rather that levels of aggression were changed by viewing aggressive sort of material or violent sort of material. And of course, everybody's watched kids after they watch pro wrestling. You'll see them, making the same moves. Now, unfortunately, kids don't sometimes know that some of that stuff is fake, and so they'll actually do stuff that's dangerous. That's where it can get pretty hairy. So, in fact, we have to watch what they're modeling. Much of the focus on social learning has had to do with how negative models produce negative modeling. On the other hand, positive models can also influence behavior. If we provide kids with pro-social models, in other words, model being positive and helpful to others, then they're also likely to follow suit, particularly if we have a close relationship with them, if they look up to us in any way. So providing a pro-social model can increase pro-social behavior in children. So there you go. That's about all I want to say on that, and hopefully that will allow you to complete the rest of the topics in the chapter, and that's it.